Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is February 27th. It's Tuesday, and you are listening and watching the Daily AI Show live. And today we are talking about, is your favorite podcast or is your favorite news source AI generated? And I got this idea. By the way, we have Jimmy and Beth, and I'm Brian. We're the three hanging out today. We'll see if anybody else pops in. But I got this idea.
Just based on the name of the show, not AI generated. We're totally, you can
we
tell
are here.
because I just interrupted and spoke over Brian.
We'll get into that too, because we were just talking about interruptions and what are the telltale signs. So the first place we have to start is like, well, where did this even come from? This show, we all submit show ideas. This particular one was me because Perplexity, which at some point they're going to have to start sponsoring us because we talk about them a lot, but it's because we do love them. Perplexity just they're putting out a daily podcast. Now it's called Discover Daily Podcast. I can pull it up on the screen here in a second as part of our conversation. And they have partnered with 11 Labs, another one of our sort of, maybe front runners is in terms of audio dubbing, getting things to sound like you, or they already have predetermined voices that they use, which is the case in this case. And anyway, what they're doing in this podcast, again, called the Discover Daily Podcast, is on, if you use Perplexity, they have an area called Discover Daily. And it's just a curated, almost like RSS feed of interesting new topics. No different than you would find in Reuters or AP News or any of your news sources. So nothing different there, except that these summaries are AI generated. I mean, I don't know how much human oversight there is on it. And then what they do is they take some of those curated stories. They don't use all of them because the shows are usually only about 5 minutes. Then they use an 11 Labs voice. I think he says his name is Alex. I'll have to double check. And it's like a British voice, and boom, there's your podcast, right? So it's only like 5 minutes long. It's not some super long, hour-long deal. But that was sort of the nexus of this conversation, because what I said was like, ooh, okay, this is getting good, and we kind of know where this stuff is going. So that opens up a whole other can of worms of, okay, if this is super easy to do, and Jimmy, I want to ask about your comment here in a second. Where does that take us in the future months? Not even just like 2024 election and the craziness that we kind of see coming for there in the US, but just in general, if your NPR news, because I was mentioning that my wife listens to the NPR news podcast. We're old. And she, what if that was AI generated, but they didn't really say it was? Is that a problem? Where are the ethics there? So there's a lot to unpack here, but that was just a long intro to kind of get us started. But Jimmy, can you tell the audience real quick what you were telling me right before? Because you said, hey, Brian, I did go listen to the Discover Daily podcast. And what was your reaction?
Well, my initial reaction was it's pretty smooth. Now, you of course we're at the level right now where you can tell the difference, and there are the little telltale signs, but it's gotten to a point where it's gotten over the hump of, is this good or not? And it is. I had no problem listening to it. I was drinking coffee, walking around, just listening to it, looking up other stuff on working on my computer. And I had no problem just absorbing what was coming through it. And that was like the benefit of a podcast, right? You can just play it whenever you want and right, absorb the info. And so I think it's gotten to a point where it's good enough to start just ingesting it, right? Mm-hmm. I would say even maybe 6 months ago, you could absolutely tell. Right. And if you have ever used some of the early AI voices, some of them are pretty grating. Right. It's very artificial, things like that. It was just the cool factor of being able to have a generated voice to read all that text and everything. But now you're getting better inflection, you're getting better cadence and those kinds of things. So, yeah, it's at a point where it's now good. So
let's listen to a quick clip of it, because this is today's show from Discover Daily, and we'll just listen to a quick little blip here.
Welcome back to Discover Daily, where we bring you stories that inform and connect you with the latest from the world of technology, business, and beyond. In today's episode, we're exploring developments that are shaping the future across various sectors. In a significant move to expand its AI offerings, my tech industry. From the real-life Barbie flip phone, a collaboration.
Okay, so that's probably enough to get it. Again, it's only like a 4-minute thing. By the way, Carl just joined us. Welcome, Carl. We're just talking about, we just played a little clip of the Discover Daily from Perplexity. First reactions from that for me, obviously, were it's a British voice. Now, I am the first to say I can be swayed by a good British voice or Australian voice, and British
100%.
probably more than anything else. And I will perceive it to be more true if it's in a British voice. I'll fully admit this. I'll admit it. I know better. But if I hear two sources of truth and it's like, or three, like, right, you were saying, Beth, like, which one's a lie? Two truths and a lie. If that lie's in a British voice, I'm stuck, man. I'm like, damn, that sounds right. I know that's not where Disney World is. I know it's not in Austin, Texas. But man, he sounds convincing. Or she does. If it's a woman's voice, I believe it even more.
It's
they
the
definitely went with the British voice on purpose. I mean,
without a doubt.
Yeah, totally on purpose. And honestly, that's probably just from 50 years of, speaking with credibility and authority in all of our media and everything like that. Some good, some bad, but still, if you hear it, like, oh wait, I have to pay attention, right? All right, I have to
funny.
give it a grain of truth just by listening. And I don't know if that's a good thing. Probably not. But yeah, that was definitely a choice. And this does bring up the overall main theme of the show is, so is this good or not? Like, right. should we be worried about what path this is going down? On one side, it makes production a lot easier. So when you're coming up with your news copy or whatnot, if you had your narrator, announcer / anchor, whether it's a podcast or, a video or anything like that, this would be an easier, quicker way of getting the overall story produced and out there for people to listen to. But I think it might just go back down to the concept of trust, which is in the last few years has been a huge thing in the media, right? Or for media in general. And so having to analyze all your various sources, and Beth, you talk about media literacy, IT or AI literacy and all that kind of thing. And this is smack dab into that discussion. And so is it just a matter of, oh, I trust this source because of X, Y, or Z, and then it's not a problem? And then what we've discussed in the previous shows, the level of transparency. And you can obviously see from that podcast page there, that landing page, they're very clear about, oh, this is generated from Perplexity's system, and it's in conjunction with 11 Labs. And so they're fairly transparent about it.
And I just wanted to bring this up really quick, and then Carl and Beth, I want to get your guys' thoughts on this because I know it's been mostly Jimmy and I, but this is Perplexity, right? So this is the Microsoft partners with Mistral. This was one of the stories that was on the podcast for today. So, okay, we got, Perplexity. It's showing us our sources. It's saying 6 more. But, okay, I don't have all of this baked in when I'm listening to the podcast. So do I just need to say, oh, I trust that Perplexity, after using it many times, does in fact bring up good stories, AI generated or not, with solid sources. And I know that is the background of this podcast. And so I am okay with the information being presented in this podcast. Or do you say, like, oh, I don't know. I mean, what's to say that they got this right, that their sources are correct? Even just because AI is pulling it doesn't necessarily. And let's say there are 5 or 6 sources. Saltwire, I don't know Saltwire. I don't know if that's a great source or not a great source. So it just brings up a lot more conversation about, like, well, what is backing this, as opposed to a show like this, by the way, which has always been more intended and based on the idea of like a morning show, your traditional morning show on the radio, where it's 3 to 5 to 7 of us bantering back and forth about a topic, but at no point are we saying, hey, these are cited sources, this is confirmed. This is usually just our opinion, and that's understood as part of the show. I don't know, where's the line when you get to podcasts, you get to sort of news sources, because even though it's Perplexity, it's the news of the day. So do they have to do more now to make sure that they build that trust, like you were saying, Jimmy? I don't know. Beth, Carl, where do you guys land on this?
I think asterisks are sticky. So I think it's a really important thing to take into consideration. Like, if you're not Perplexity, but you're looking at this and saying like, hey, full transparency and making sure that you don't lose the trust that your humanness has built, right? So, and then what I mean by asterisk is sticky. I think that when you start to lose that trust, people put a question mark in their head about whether you are a source of truth. And I think that's important. I love the idea of being able to shorten something and put it in a voice of authority, but also other languages, right? That's the other thing that 11 Labs can do, is translate it. And now you can send your message out in a variety of languages that sound like a native speaker or close enough for an electronic podcast, an AI podcast.
We have lots of comments here too, but Carl, go first, and then we'll pull up some of these cool comments.
Yeah, it's funny because somebody sent me a note saying, hey, is this easy to replicate? Because I wanted to start a podcast and I want to do this. Can we do this? I was like, okay, if one person had that thought, there's a lot of people who had, we can easily start a podcast. Mm-hmm. And I think we all know the road that's going to go down. So I still believe if this is the way people are going to go, there's going to be even more podcasts coming out, or potentially coming out. And then the question is, will we have a deluge of these automated podcasts? And I wonder what the reception will be for that. Maybe initially it'd be great, but over time we'll be like, oh, those are all automated. So, we're still looking for that human one, that human experience, right? The ones that, like we do, right? The ones that, when and it comes out, it's like, it's natural and real, and there's actually dialogue back and forth from it. Right. So it'd be, that was my very first thought. And then I think the second part is, when you're looking at how long these podcasts could possibly be, I know, just thinking about, hey, you're probably automating all the information that, the news of the day, and then someone manually looks, okay, we're going to pick one or two topics, whichever that topic is, then or they put the entire podcast is already done and they just cut it. Whatever the manual step is there, it's interesting to see how it's been played out, connected to 11 Labs, and then distributed, and then how fast that podcast actually takes to develop, because it can't be that long. Like, we're talking 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes max of actual work. But for a manual person, for the manual labor, quote unquote, is probably less than 2 minutes. So it's interesting to see how fast it's developed. But then we're gonna probably see the deluge of that in podcasts. And I don't know if people know that of the actually how many millions of podcasts on Apple Podcasts, about 500,000 of them only have one episode. So maybe this changes, that there'll be more kind of topics that people create, which then leads to more choice. Like, oh, there's a lot of cool different things that we can listen to.
Kind of like YouTube, right? Like, we see so many talking head videos and stuff like that, where they're much more automated. And now with 11 Labs and AI, it's getting even easier to do. Yeah, I'd be curious, like you said, Carl. Again, I think it comes back to I'll say this real quick, and then I want to get to the comments. It does come back to that upfront transparency for me. If I'm reading a newsletter that I write, Ben's Bites, just off the top of my head, an AI newsletter, and Ben's Bites is like, hey, we also convert this directly into a podcast, because let's be honest, sometimes you just rather listen to our newsletter in the car. or in travel or whatever. And so we have an AI generated version of this. Great. If we, as Daily AI Show, said, hey, every Friday we're going to put out a bonus episode, or every other Friday when we do our 2-week wrap-up show, and it's going to be an automated generated voice of one of us doing a recap of the topics the last 2 weeks, and all our input for that would probably be either all the transcripts or just like the Spotify transcripts that we use. And then it would just be a summary of it. And the point to that whole thing would be full transparency. This is AI generated. Its entire intent for us as the showrunners would just be to get people to go back and listen to old episodes or whatever, just like the newsletter. But we're saying right up front, like, this is what it is. But we think this is helpful in some way to our audience. And so we created it. Okay. I want to get to some of these comments really quick. So Jen asked right off the top of the show, do we think GPS voices are British so people pay more attention to? Yes, is my answer to that.
Make a right, Jen.
The first thing I did with Pi, the app Pi, was or maybe it was already set this way, but it's either an Australian or a British woman's voice. I trust it way more. So Greg said a trick that I've been using is to use foreign voices like Latin American French, because the accent hides the AI sound of the voice. I think that makes total sense to me. Seems like the brain just throws all those artifacts into the accent and lets you jump the uncanny valley. I think that's really cool. And then there was like a follow-up question to that, where Delma had asked, hey Greg, I wonder if the inverse is also true. Will native speakers of other languages jump the uncanny valley with Americanized accents? And Greg was saying, like, yeah, I would bet so. It feels to me like it's audio processing thing, at least in my brain. It's very tuned into my native language, so all the little variations jump out. And this is probably a great place to jump off from Greg's point, and everybody else. Delma, I think it was, and Jen and all that. By the way, Jen says Saltwire is based out of Canada. Carl, how did you not jump in with that immediately? Come on. How come we had to have Jen help us out with the Canadian facts here, Carl?
Don't you know all Canadians, Carl? I mean,
I know all Canadians. We all know each other.
Everybody in that country, Carl.
And we know all our businesses, and we know everything about everything.
Because I want to pull this up really quick, because this is the Uncanny Valley. So, like, let's pull this up really quick. This is a podcast called Business Lunch with Ryan Deese and Roland Frazier. I know who Ryan Deese is from back in the day. I don't know who Roland Frazier is. Now, at the end of this podcast, they revealed that the whole thing was AI. I think you guys and our audience is going to find out pretty quickly. You can tell. You can just tell.
Do we need to manage consents, be mindful of privacy, and even provide laws and regulations to guide how the data we provide is used? Yes, absolutely. But still, I believe the trade-off of data usage for customer experience will win the day in the heart of the average consumer.
Okay, but what about the data? I didn't realize I was...
Okay.
Yeah.
Not horrible, by the way. I kind of know what Ryan sounds like. I don't know who Roland is, so does that sound like him or not? It sounded like Ryan Deese from what I remember, but has those weird pauses in them where they shouldn't be, and it makes the sound odd, right? So there's like that whole part of it in there. I know. I do a very good AI voice. So that was a 20-minute episode. Back to your point, Carl, about like how long are these podcasts going to be? They said, he did. That's how I found out about this guy. Roland put out a YouTube video, and he's like, "Oh, whether this is a true story or not." He's like, "Oh, we were behind in making our episodes, and it was episode 439." And I asked Ryan, haha, how would you think about our last episode? And he said we were behind, and so then I said, "No, we're not. We've already produced it." Right? It sounded like a cheesy story to me that's totally made up, and they both knew about this, but. Regardless, that was his YouTube story. But case in point, that exists. This is from July of last year. It probably would already be better now.
Oh, it would totally be better now. And the other thing that we haven't talked about in this is that I don't know about anybody else, but I never listen to podcasts on 1x speed. It's always 1.5 or 1.75. And then I don't like the pauses don't track as much. And like there are podcast players that like that have AI that cut out the spaces so it sounds like more. So like those kinds of tells may not even be what you listen to.
Me and Jimmy talked about that right before we went live, because we were saying, look, at some point there's going to be a slider, because I fully believe all of these little problems, if you will be wiped out by AI in some way, because this is, Carl said it, this is going to be a booming industry if it's not already. And so people will create solutions around these problems. And so we were saying that there'll be a slider for how many interjections and talkovers you want, and it'll be like a temperature control. And so it'll be like, how many times do you want Brian to go, oh, I'm sorry, Jimmy, go ahead, or whatever? Or no, you go, Beth, you go, like we do on this show, because, one of us starts talking and then we hold off for the other person or whatever. So I totally believe in some Adobe-like, post editing software like Jimmy deals with a lot. This will just be tweaks and knobs and sliders. And at the end of a post editing, I think, Jimmy, right now, wouldn't you say that we could probably produce, the seven of us could probably produce a almost lifelike, indistinguishable, let's say 10-minute episode? Do you think that's possible right now, that we could deceive our audience if we wanted to do that?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And if it was only audio, we could do the entire show.
Oh yeah,
in AI. If it was video, the only limitations right now is how many chunks can we do, like through HeyGen or
it would be very expensive right now.
Yeah, it would be expensive, but you could technically do it.
And we would have to worry about how much we all moved our face. Like we would all, like, you would have to think about that before you did that, because we'd want to definitely all keep kind of looking forward. You don't want to have a whole lot of this stuff or whatever, just so that our mouths are all, syncing up the way they're supposed to. So there'd have to be a lot of like pre-thought into that about how do you create these sort of, and Aaron, I wish Aaron was here for this, like your talking heads. You need your talking heads to do it.
And that's not a tell at all, right? Like, who could tell if we're doing this?
We're all doing
daily AI show. It's like
the same.
Good point, Carl.
So I will say it has improved a lot in the last couple of months. Like, I've seen clips now where people are putting up about 30 seconds of themselves, and they're like at a desk, and they're moving their hands and their bodies a fair amount. I don't know how much tweaking, and finessing they had to do to get it to that point. But the fact that the software, the services now can produce that. I could talk like this. I could generate a clip just doing this. And then with some creative editing, that's easy enough. And we have almost 150 shows at this point.
We have enough footage for everybody.
Yeah, we have more than enough footage for generating it. Yeah.
Hey, I want to bring this up because this will bring up a sort of maybe like one of the topic to take us to the end here is about the ethics side of it. Now, this is, if you're not watching us, you're listening, this is podcast.ai. I just found these while I was doing some research for the show. A podcast that is entirely generated by artificial intelligence. Right off the bat, nobody's trying to deceive anybody. This is made up. This is fake. It's similar to listening to the George Carlin comedy special, which is crazy, like good in terms of AI. Now they're being sued by the George Carlin estate, probably as they should be. But they're saying it's parody and all this stuff. But when you listen to it, it is insanely good. But anyway, this is Podcast AI. Every week we'll explore a new topic. Well, they only have 5 on here. I don't know if they kept going with it. Right off the top here, we have Joe Rogan interviews Steve Jobs. Now, Steve Jobs passed away several years ago. I don't, over a decade ago, probably now, right? I don't know if Joe Rogan was doing the Joe Rogan speech, so I don't know if this would have been possible at the time anyway, but we can kind of...
This podcast is...
Here, we're going to pop into it.
Word processing
sorry.
And an image editor. That just showed me that this dude was brilliant, had amazing taste, and I would just hope that I could be even like 1/10.
Okay, we're going to pop the middle here.
I mean, it's nice to sit back in the car and listen to you rant. I've always liked you.
Well, appreciate that.
Okay, in that one, they kind of make Steve Jobs sound like an excited clown, which probably is because the audio wasn't as crisp and clear back when Steve Jobs, he didn't die that long ago, but still there's a difference, right? Like the Joe Rogan voice and Steve Jobs voice do not sound the same. Here's a different one of Oprah.
Remember that it's okay to say no.
in this
He's giving
fast-paced
stress
world,
management
we
strategy.
often feel like we have to say yes to everything.
Definitely sounds like Oprah. Here's
No,
one of Zach
definitely doesn't
Galifianakis.
sound like Oprah.
You know, like a Royale with cheese.
No, it doesn't.
All right. So, Quentin, I heard you like to collect rubber ducks. How many do you have in your collection?
What? I have never collected rubber ducks in my life.
Okay, that's
So
Zach
this
Galifianakis.
this
and
is
Quentin
interesting
Tarantino.
because the more familiar I am with the voice, the more it bothers me that the depth of the voice is gone.
Is not correct. 100%.
Right?
So you didn't think Oprah sounded like Oprah?
No.
No.
And it's not that I didn't.
Sorry.
Yeah.
As a little bit, but exactly what Beth was saying is when I was listening, I was like, oh, there's no timbre. There is no depth. The lower range is gone. And that might be just an indicator of where the technology is, because I know Aaron has talked to us about when each, he's shown us some of the things he's been working on. And that's our number one complaint is, oh, it sounds flat, right? There's very little depth or range to the voice. And I think that's one of those, oh, this is the worst it's ever going to be,
Right.
kind of things.
And I
But,
didn't notice it with the other voices that I'm not more familiar with.
Exactly.
But, like Oprah has like all the low notes are gone, just in the way that the voices sound, which you can do in post too. But why would you? Right? I mean, like if you can. Yeah.
I wonder if you guys listen to that. I have no idea. It doesn't really matter, but I'd be curious if you guys would go to that podcast.ai and listen to it on your own computer to see if some of that was that audio loss was just from streaming it through streaming.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Yeah.
But again, you may also say like it doesn't sound like Oprah. To me, I would have been like, no, that sounds like Oprah. Joe Rogan sound like Joe Rogan. Zach Galifianakis, and Quentin and Tarantino, which was the last one. Again, this falls into the area of we are telling you straight from the top. This is impossible. This is made up. Sometimes you may have like a Bing Crosby and somebody from modern day, and you go, okay, well they did not cross paths in life, so of course that's made up. Just by the tell of who the thing is. But this comes back to the topic of okay, all the ones we've said, the Perplexity one, the podcast with Ryan Deese and the other guy, this one. From the top or at the end of the show, this was AI generated. We're telling you right off the bat. What happens? Should there be laws about this? Like, let's wrap this up. What do you do when podcasts and news sources stop telling you that this is what they're doing and it becomes indistinguishable and you can't tell the difference? Do you still listen to the podcast? Can you go, well, I trust the people who are creating this? Is that any different than a CNN or a Fox News? I don't know. What do you guys think?
That isn't different, right? Because it would be for those who let's take a look at I don't know who are the two who are I don't think Tucker Carlson is still like he's not on Fox News anymore, right? So he's doing his thing. I remember. So let's take him for example, whether you are agreement or disagreement, whatever it is, right? So I think we all knew he went to Russia, interviewed Vladimir Putin. So imagine he says, oh, I went to North Korea, interviewed Kim Jong-il. And he has a podcast out that says that. I would assume he went there and talked to Kim Jong-il. But what happens if maybe he didn't? Like you could, I'm sure you can get clips of the dictator, and then you can clips of Tucker Carlson in a podcast talking about stuff, and you can make it sound as if it's a legitimate podcast and a legitimate conversation. And then, or Tucker Carlson said, yeah, I did it, but he never really did it. So I think that's a little tough, but then we as the audience in the end still have to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I would trust it, or I just have to be more critical thinking and be like, maybe not. And I think that's, what maybe not on topic for this show, but like critical thinking is now 100 times more important to what you're listening and what you're consuming, because as we showed today, it's there. Like,
so, and that brings up like this comment from Greg: we don't require human newscast to be truthful or verified, but we have assumed that human newscasts are human, right? Like that has been something that we have assumed up till now. But the Human-ish with an asterisk, right?
Human-ish.
Carl's example brings up like the national security kind of stuff. Like you now have the ability to like completely piss off a nutcase with a nuke that can impact like the world, right? In a way that is that is available for, I don't know, $1.50, $29.99 for the general public.
Very cheap. Yeah, very cheap by comparison. Like we were just talking about HeyGen, and like, oh, that'd be cost prohibitive to us to do anything of a length of time. But not if you're motivated, not if you have money backing you, not if you have, you know, these super PACs and things like that in our politics in the US and so on and so on. So, you know, not very expensive, not very time consuming if you are motivated, if you're so motivated to get a certain viewpoint out. Yeah, I love what Greg said too, which is like, you know, is this really different than humans? And what I go back to is what you said, Beth. And this is more the video side of this, not necessarily just a podcast or a news podcast, if you will. But I go back to what you say all the time, Beth, because you just like you didn't change my thinking, but you just made me go like, oh God, that's right. Which is, it is totally different if I hear it or if I see a person that I know or I'm familiar with say something. It's very hard for me to erase that back out of my brain, or at least I believe it is, to say, no, that was fake, even if I still saw it. So yeah, just kind of like really interesting. That's really more like the video side of it. I do want to just bring up Jen's last two comments here, and then we'll wrap things up. But she said, I prefer my DOS co-hosts in actual 3D. Thanks. Talk to me again once the AI video has progressed more. Jen, you know we will. Or we'll just do a show and we'll be AI. And then I love her last comment, which is, today I learned which DOS co-hosts watch Oprah. But look, this is really interesting. We were definitely going to come back to this because there's going to be more in this, just like everything with AI. And so this is where we are today. There's, you know, we played a couple of examples. I like what Perplexity is doing. I have no problem with it. But it definitely made me go like, oh, where is this going and how fast are we going to get there? And what happens when we stop being so transparent up front about using these technologies? And of course, that goes into a much larger discussion. So we'll leave it there. Come back and hang out with us the rest of the week. Tomorrow, you know, we're going to be talking about the news, and then we'll go on for the rest of the week. Until then, guys, we'll see ya.